YouTube, and welcome to episode 2 of the Pro Peace Report. My name is Kobe, the host. And so today I want to talk about a few topics. I wanted to start by talking about Princess Blanding, who is a candidate for the governor's race in Virginia for the Liberation Party, and how she got excluded from a debate, even though she is one of only 3 candidates on the ballot in Virginia. So I wanted to talk about kind of the history of third-party candidates getting excluded from presidential debates and how it plays a role in them not becoming viable candidates. I wanted to talk about how America needs a third party. I mean, that's like the huge thing in my activism, is that I don't think working within the Democratic Party or Republican parties, I don't think either of those are the path out of capitalism into the world that we want to see, that treats everybody fairly and equally. And so after talking a little bit about third-party exclusion from debates, I was going to get into ranked choice voting and how it would help end the spoiler effect that prevents third parties from, getting votes, because, we'll talk about that later. And then I wanted to end by talking about proportional representation and how it operates in some other countries that have a proportional representation system, and a bill in the Congress in the US that would help make that a reality here too. So let's dive in. So I'm going to share my screen. Hang on a sec. Okay, it was blocked on my computer for some reason, but now it is unblocked. And so here is the tweet that I saw this morning. And it says here, dramatic moment at #VAGov debate as progressive third-party candidate screams about not being allowed on stage. Debate derailed for several minutes. Quote, "You are not going to win, Terry." Princess Blanding, a candidate with the Liberation Party. And so let's watch that video real quick. I mean, she's justifiably angry here. We'll see details in a minute. She's the only candidate on the ballot who was not included on that debate stage. And so here in the second tweet, we're going to hear what she said after the debate in an interview.
Candidate governor on the ballot.
And what did you just do there?
I just made it very clear that I am a candidate to let Virginians know that their censorship of my candidacy is racist. It is very sexist. It is very oppressive. And it's a form of voter suppression. Their goal is to make sure that Virginians don't know that I exist, so that they feel that they have to choose between the lesser of two evils.
How are you being censored?
They will not allow me to participate in the debates. I made it on the ballot. They have an already made base. I had to work 10 times harder to get on that ballot just to be told that I'm not allowed to debate. I have to come and sit in the audience. I mean, that is a bunch of bullshit. That's exactly what it is.
Do you think?
And then no police come when this man is literally physically pushing against me. He's taking his big body and he's pushing up against me. Not one police officer comes. We're not going to sit here and talk about it. I was told that this is for the business class. Well, guess what? Those are 2 millionaires. I made less than $1,500 during the last reporting. In order to get on the ballot, I had next to no money, but I stayed boots on the ground. And people, Virginians across the board, Republican, Democratic, and independent, signed that petition in order to get me on. But they are trying to silence me so that no one knows that I am a candidate on the ballot, and they feel that they have to choose between the lesser of the 2 evils. I will not be silenced.
Do you think shouting down the debate is the best way to do it? You could just call a press conference.
Well, guess what?
Right?
And every time I do an interview, most of the press do not even air it, or they will misquote me. Okay, so guess what? I refuse to play by the games and the rules of the duopoly. In order for Virginians to ensure our rightful place, we will take it. I am not going to ask anymore. We have been told to trust the system, and the system is meant to keep third-party candidates oppressed, to make sure that people don't know about us. I have done everything that I needed to do in order to get on the ballot. Why am I not able to participate in the debate? We have these two rich white men that are sitting up there, and you don't hear anyone reporting that I am the only black woman in the history of Virginia to ever make it on the ballot. But I can't have my voice heard. I can't speak and represent the voices, needs, and concerns of all Virginians. Again, it's not okay. And for people to sit in there, all I'm listening to around me is people talking about their timeshares and their investments when we have people who don't have anywhere to lay their heads at.
Oh, that's absolutely inspiring, what she's doing right there. And everything she's saying is absolutely correct. They don't include third parties in debates because the two major parties don't want you to know they exist and don't want you to know what they believe in. And so we see here on ballotpedia.com for the Virginia gubernatorial election 2021. And it kind of shows, just how the narrative gets framed in such a way where the only two candidates are always Democrats and Republicans. And, even if there are other candidates on the ballot, like the Liberation Party in Virginia, the first Black woman ever on the ballot for the governor of Virginia, they still get erased from the picture entirely. So you see here, Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin are running in the general election for governor of Virginia on November 2nd, 2021. Incumbent Governor Ralph Northam is unable to seek re-election due to term limits. But then let's look down here. I'm not going to read it all. What we see here. Now in the 5th or 6th paragraph, Princess Blanding and Paul Davis are also running in the election. Blanding will appear on the general election ballot. Davis is running as a write-in candidate. But see here, they mention her very briefly, Princess Blanding here. And then they go on to talk about Democrats and Republicans again. We see here, two here, McAuliffe and Youngkin. But where's Princess Blanding? Where is she? Let's look. Election updates. Oh, there we have it. Now we have the four major candidates right here. Terry McAuliffe, Glenn Youngkin, Princess Blanding, and Paul Davis, who's a write-in. So his name's not on the ballot. But still, these are the only four candidates. And Princess is the only other one whose name is on the ballot. And she is the first Black woman to ever get on the ballot in Virginia. And still completely kept out of the debates. And so let's look a little bit at Princess's platform, because I think it kind of gives us an idea of why she's excluded from the debates like she is. And so let's see here. Public safety and criminal justice reform. We have reallocate funding from police departments to reinvest in education, housing, sustainable energy, and community care programs. That's defund the police, something that both parties almost unanimously disagree with. We have ending qualified immunity, end racist mass incarceration, investigate root causes and establish inclusive initiatives and legislation to combat the profound systemic racism present in Virginia's schools, hospitals, businesses, and the public that exist in the form of discrimination, intimidation, and inequalities. There's another good one down here. This is a big one that the capitalists don't want on the ballot, don't want you to hear about. Nationalize vacant, corporate-owned, unaffordable units and place them under community control with rent-to-own programming, bolstering homeownership for marginalized communities. So that's nationalizing housing, taking housing away from private ownership and putting it in the hands of the community, of the public. That is what we call socialism, folks, or even communism. Let's see another one that probably explains why she's not on that debate stage. End the for-profit nature of the healthcare system. And so that's what Medicare for All aims to do with health insurance. It gets rid of private health insurance and makes it all public and paid for by taxes. Saying here, end the for-profit nature of the healthcare system itself, that goes even further. That goes even to hospitals. That goes, even to doctors' offices, making it so that there is no profit motive in any part of the healthcare system because it's a human right, not a privilege. She's pro-LGBTQIA rights. Labor. We've got stuff down here about forming more labor unions. And so these are the kinds of candidates that they don't want us to hear about. They don't want us to hear about third-party candidates who are on the ballot. And so here's another example of a third-party candidate that was excluded from the debates. This is Lisa Savage, who was a Green Party candidate for senator in Maine in the 2020 election. The two independent candidates in Maine's U.S. Senate race have filed a formal complaint with the Federal Elections Commission for being excluded from this Wednesday's debate hosted by Portland television station WMTW. The complaints by independents Max Lynn and Lisa Savage being a Green Party candidate here, argues that WMTW's decision is not based on objective criteria and could constitute an illegal in-kind contribution to the campaigns of Republican Susan Collins and Democrat Sarah Gideon. And so the reason why it would be considered an illegal in-kind contribution from our perspective would be that they're giving these two corporate mainstream candidates already, the Democrats and Republicans, they get a platform to speak to their entire state, or in the terms of the presidential debates, the entire country. So that's giving them free media time, free attention that these third-party candidates are always excluded from getting. Let's go on. So Lisa Savage ended up getting about 40,000 votes, 5% of the vote in Maine. They have ranked choice voting now, but still not allowed to participate in the debates. Here is another big example of a candidate being excluded from the debates. This one's a little bit dramatic. We have and this was from 2016. At the last presidential debate at Hofstra University, Jill Stein got handcuffed to a chair for 8 hours. On Monday evening, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and real estate mogul Donald Trump will gather on stage at Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York, for the first presidential debate of the 2016 election. Notably absent from the debate stage will be Green Party candidate Dr. Jill Stein and Libertarian candidate former Governor Gary Johnson, who's former governor of New Mexico, neither of whom were able to meet the 15% polling threshold set by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Johnson will be spending the debate tweeting from Twitter's corporate office in Manhattan. Stein will be live streaming from a protest outside the debate venue. For Stein, at least, this lobbying is nothing new. When she ran as the Green Party nominee 4 years ago, Stein staged a similar protest when President Barack Obama squared off against former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney on the very same stage at Hofstra University. Stein's goal was to make a point about how the two major parties use their institutional advantages to shut out other voices. She ended up spending 8 hours handcuffed to a chair, all for trying to get into the debates and participate. Stein was arrested at the second Obama-Romney presidential debate of the 2012 cycle. Moderated by CNN correspondent Candy Crowley, the debate was styled as a town hall where undecided voters had the opportunity to directly ask questions of candidates. Standing outside the venue about 6 hours before the proceedings were set to kick off, Stein and her running mate Sherry Hunkala held up an American flag and made their case to the assembled media. Quote, "We're here at the barred gates of American debates to say that we need to open up this debate and make it a full, fair, and inclusive debate," said Stein, video of which was captured by the left-wing media outlet Democracy Now! Quote, "Our Green campaign is on the ballot for 85% of voters. 85% of voters deserve to know who their choices are in this election and what the real solutions are that can solve the desperate problems that we are facing. The Commission on Presidential Debates makes a mockery of democracy by conducting this fake and contrived debate." I mean, they literally locked Jill Stein to a chair in 2012 for trying to participate in the presidential debates even though she was on enough ballots to hypothetically win the Electoral College. And so now we have here, they actually filed a lawsuit about this. Judge quashes Gary Johnson/Jill Stein debate lawsuit. After sitting on the case for months, Judge Rosemary Collier of the U.S. District Court for Washington, D.C. this morning shut down a legal challenge by Libertarian Party presidential nominee Gary Johnson and presumptive Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein to be included in this fall's presidential debates. In denying the plaintiff's appeal to the Commission on Presidential Debates motion to dismiss, Collier ruled that Johnson and Stein have no standing to make antitrust and First Amendment challenges to the CPD's rules, which require a third-party candidate to average 15% support in 5 national polls in the run-up to debates, because the defendants are private parties. Johnson and Stein had sought to change the qualifying standard for debate inclusion to be getting on enough state ballots to have a mathematical possibility of winning the election, an arduous task on its own, as anyone who has worked in third-party ballot access can tell you. Since getting into the presidential debates has been the linchpin of Johnson's campaign strategy, today's news certainly comes as a kick in the teeth. Quote, "It's the most important political litigation in the last 50 years, Judge Jim Gray, the 2012 Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee and 2016 honorary chairman of the Gary Johnson-affiliated Our America initiative, told me 3 weeks ago." And so that's the thing. Johnson and Stein in 2016, what they were trying to do is change the qualifications to get into the debates from being 15% support in 5 different national polls to being mathematically able to win the election. And so this comes in response to people who say, oh, well, we can't let Jill Stein and Gary Johnson on the debate stage because then we just have to let any nobody fringe candidate on too. No, that's not true. In 2016, there were only 4 political parties on enough state ballots to win the Electoral College. Those parties were the Democrats and Republicans and the Greens and the Libertarians. And so now we're going to look a little bit more at, the idea of if if they were popular enough to get on the debate stages, they would have gotten on, but they didn't get on because they're not popular enough. Well, I would counter that by saying the reason they're not popular enough to get on debate stages, whether it be Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, or whether it be local third-party candidates, usually that's the case because of that institutional advantage that Jill Stein was talking about in that last article. The institutional advantage of people know Democrats and Republicans and hear about them on the TV all day, every day. And so from 2016, outside young voters, most Americans still don't know Johnson or Stein. So today's piece on the growing momentum of both Jill Stein and Gary Johnson among younger voters is a positive sign for both campaigns. But outside of these demographics, Gallup shows a much more negative outlook for both minor party candidates because it seems only young voters know who they are. Approximately 2/3 of Americans still don't consider themselves familiar with Johnson at 63% and Stein at 68%. And so that's the thing. If you are only known by 30% of voters and you have 10% in the case of Johnson in that poll and 5% in the case of Jill Stein in that poll. So they had about half the people who knew them kind of liked them and were willing to vote for them. But think about it. If they had been able to get on the main debate stage against Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the 2 most unpopular presidential candidates in modern American history, if the voters had been given a legitimate choice of a third-party candidate in Gary Johnson or Jill Stein, it's very likely that more people would have supported them. So it's a chicken or the egg dilemma here. You need 15% support in 5 different national polls to qualify for presidential debates. But if only 30% of the country even knows who you are, how do you get there? The presidential debates are how you have your ideas seen by a national audience. The media doesn't portray third-party candidates like Libertarian Gary Johnson and Green Jill Stein, they weren't portrayed as being viable. They were portrayed as fringe nobodies. But if they're on the debate stage and they are given a chance to hold their own against the duopoly, the Democrats and Republicans, a lot more people might change their minds. And here's another bit from 2016 again. Voters want Gary Johnson, Jill Stein on the debate stage. Gary Johnson is polling below the required threshold to earn a spot on the presidential debate stage with the major party presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But most voters think he should be there anyway. A new survey by Morning Consult found that 52% of voters think the former New Mexico governor and Libertarian nominee should join the Democratic and Republican candidates when they are scheduled to appear together for the first time on September 26th. When asked about Green Party candidate Jill Stein, who has consistently polled lower than Johnson in Morning Consult surveys, 47% of voters said she too should be allowed to participate. So let's look at this Morning Consult poll. You have a majority of Americans who wanted Gary Johnson on that debate stage. You had nearly half of Americans who wanted Jill Stein on that debate stage. Only 22 and 26% wanted them not to be on the stage, and another quarter were uncertain about it. And so they need this 15% support in 5 different national polls, even though most Americans don't know them. And still, they have much more than 15% of Americans who want them in the debates. And so let's look at what ended up happening in the 2016 presidential election. Here we have in New Mexico. Gary Johnson received 9.3% of the vote in New Mexico, where he had been governor in the past. So they actually knew him there. He had 74,000 votes. Jill Stein had 1.2% at around 10,000 votes. Now let's look at Utah. This is where a third-party candidate did the most, or did the best, out of all of the states in 2016. We have Evan McMullin, who's a CIA, conservative kind of guy, centrist, Republican, so not the type of candidate I would support. But I think it goes to show the hunger for a third party that there is in America. Evan McMullin had received 240,000 votes, 21.3%, and he had also not been able to debate. So even though he had been unable to debate in 2016 to hold his own against the two corporate duopoly presidential candidates, he still got almost a quarter of the vote in Utah. This Gallup poll here, this one from 2021, February of earlier this year, support for third U.S. political party at a high point. 62% say a third party is needed, up from 57% in September. Highest support for a third party by 1 percentage point. A record high 63% of Republicans favor a third party. And so look at this polling here. A need for a third party in America has been having a plurality or majority of the vote since 2006. So Americans have been open to the idea of a multi-party system in America since 2006. And here we are 15 years later, we're at a high point of people who want a major third party in America. And yet we see them time and time again being excluded from the debates, just like Princess Blanding was for the Liberation Party in the Virginia governor's race. I mean, I think Americans need to wake up and realize that we're never going to get a third party in America until we demand it and make space for it. We see Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden both going out there and saying America needs a strong Republican Party. Yet we don't see the squad. We don't see AOC. We don't see Ilhan Omar. We don't see Ro Khanna. We don't see any of them saying anything about the need for a strong third party in America, the need for a multi-party system in America. And I think it's time that we start demanding it. We can't keep falling in line for Democrats. We can't keep going, yeah, a third party would be nice, but it's not viable right now. And so, they should just go organize. And no, you have to help organize. If you want a third party, you have to help make space for it. You have to talk to third party candidates. You have to pressure the media to give them space. The squad should be out there every day talking about the need for multi-party democracy in America. And they won't start doing it until we start demanding it. So now I'm going to move on to our next topic for the day. And now we're going to start talking about, so what are the barriers to third parties in America? What are the major reasons why people say they won't vote for a third party in America? Usually what we would hear in 2016 and 2020 in the presidential elections was, yeah, I really like the idea of Jill Stein. I really like the things that Jill Stein or Gary Johnson say, but, if I vote for them, I'm helping the greater evil. I have to vote for the lesser of two evils, because if I don't vote for the lesser of two evils, the greater evil will win and it will be my fault. And there's a few ways that I would respond to that. First, vote your conscience. Don't vote the way that you think that you should be expected to vote. Your one individual vote really isn't going to be the difference between one or the other. It's on scales. It's on a societal scale. We need people. If you think the third party candidates are the best candidate for you, you should just vote for them and support them, because don't let fear dictate how you make your vote. But that is the reality for a lot of Americans, that they are so fearful of helping the greater evil that they support the lesser evil, somebody that they admit to be evil. And so how do we eliminate that in America? How do we get people to feel comfortable voting for a third party? And the biggest way, the most effective way that we can do that is through ranked choice voting. And so where ranked choice voting is used, before we get into where it's used, I'm actually going to play this clip. So New York City has ranked choice voting. And so this video will kind of explain how it works.
New York City now uses an election system called ranked choice voting. In ranked choice voting, you can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference. In order for a candidate to be elected, they need to receive more than 50% of the votes. If no candidate crosses 50% outright, we begin counting the second round of ballots. The candidate that receives the least amount of votes is eliminated. Whoever voted for that candidate did not waste their vote, because we look at who they ranked as their second choice. We then reallocate their vote to their second preference. We check again to see if a candidate has crossed 50%. If no one has, we keep eliminating the candidates with the least amount of votes and reallocating those votes to the voter's next preference that is still in the running. If a voter's first and second choice have both been eliminated, we then look at their third choice, and so on. This process continues until a candidate reaches 50%, at which point they are declared the winner. Be sure to fill out the opal completely and only mark one choice per candidate. It is a good idea to rank multiple candidates so you can still have a say in who our elected officials are, even if your preferred candidate loses. For more information, please visit aguda.org/vote.
So think about that. If in 2016 you had been able to rank Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump, hypothetically, your vote would have never gone to Donald Trump. You would have never had to think, oh yeah, I really think Hillary Clinton's terrible, and I really like the Green Party, but I don't want to be responsible for electing Donald Trump. I don't want to be blamed for that. Well, it wouldn't happen if we had had ranked choice voting, because if your first choice is not in the top 2, that choice is eliminated, and now it goes to your second choice. If that choice is not in the top 2, it goes to your third choice. So you never would have to fear helping the greater evil. And so now, how often is ranked choice voting used now? It's actually spreading a lot. Where ranked choice voting is used, As of September 2021, 22 jurisdictions use ranked choice voting in their most recent elections. 20 more will use ranked choice voting for the first time in November 2021, and at least 50 jurisdictions are projected to use ranked choice voting in either their next election or the one following. That represents 2 states, 1 county, and 27 cities outside of Utah, with 23 Utah city councils voting to use ranked choice voting and 19 doing so in either 2019 or 2021. And so look at that. In Maine, where I was talking about with Lisa Savage, that is one of the states where for statewide elections and for presidential elections now, you will be able to vote by ranked choice voting. Alaska is the most recent state that has passed it. In the upcoming elections, you will be able to vote in a ranked choice way. And it's not just exclusive to cities and states. We even now have political parties. The 2 major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are starting to use ranked choice voting themselves. So for the Democratic Party primaries and caucuses, you'll have Alaska, Nevada, Hawaii, Kansas, Maine, and Wyoming. And so you see here we have down here, Indiana Republican Party, Nebraska Democratic Party, Utah Republican Party, Virginia Republican Party. So it's becoming a bipartisan idea. Ranked choice voting. You see the 2 major parties starting to use it themselves, starting to test it out themselves, but they're still not letting it happen on a mass scale yet. And why do you think that is, that they don't want it to happen? Well, because as soon as we have ranked choice voting on a mass scale, people will feel comfortable to not vote for Democrats and Republicans. So here, another issue. It's not just ranked choice voting that would help third parties get more representation in America. We also need to move on from the first past the post election system to a proportional representation voting system. So we see here, in the first past the post math of a voting system, you got 38.7% of the votes ends up being 54.2% of the seats because of where the districts are, how it divides up. Because with first past the post, all it takes is the person who gets over the plurality, the one with the most votes. So say you have a party that has 38%, you have another party that's got 36%. That 38% gets the seat, the 36% gets no representation. But in a proportional representation type of system, you would have it so that if you get 38.7% of the vote, you get 38.7% of the seats. And so even if you're that small little green party down here, as we'll see happens in other countries, you would still get representation in Congress. You would have a voice in politics. So here's Canada's elections. They also go by first past the post, just like America, just like the UK. So the current results, I don't know what election this was, whether it's the one that happened most recently or whether this is the one that happened a few years ago. But you see down here, the Green Party only got 2 seats. Yet if it had been under a proportional representation system, they would have gotten 11. Down here, this party, I don't know what party that is, they got 0 seats. But if it had been proportional representation based on the percentage of the votes they got, it would have been 21 seats. And the liberals and the conservatives would have gone down from 158 to 109 to 119 to 109. See, this is the much more democratic way of doing an election. You do it proportionally, not based off of some arbitrary line on a map that is a district. No, it should be representative of the percent support of people who actually voted that way. And so let's read a little bit more about proportional representation voting systems by Fair Vote. I definitely recommend looking into Fair Vote. They're doing a lot of activism around ranked choice voting and proportional representation. So they are the exact kind of organization we need to make these changes happen. Proportional representation voting is the main rival to plurality majority voting. Among advanced Western democracies, it has become the predominant voting system. For instance, in Western Europe, 21 of 28 countries use proportional representation, including Austria, Belgium, Cyprus, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. The basic approach of proportional representation is simple. Legislators are elected in multi-member districts instead of single-member districts, and the number of seats that a party wins in an election is proportional to the amount of its support among voters. So if you have a 10-member district and the Republicans win 30 or 50% of the vote, they receive 5 of the 10 seats. If the Democrats win 30% of the vote, they get 3 seats. And if a third party gets 20% of the vote, they win 2 seats. Electoral system designers have devised several ways to achieve these proportional results, and so there are 3 basic kinds of proportional representation. I'm not going to get into those in this video. The main point here is that if you have a proportional representation voting system, you actually get representation even if you don't win, even if your party is considered fringe and only gets 20% of the vote in your state, you would still have a representative in your legislature speaking up for you. And that's monumentally important. And why is that monumentally important? Well, Sweden is a good example of how it would fundamentally change our voting system. So Sweden's 7.3 million voters will go to the polls on 9th of September. This was 2018, by the way, electing a new parliament and government to succeed the Social Democrat Green minority coalition. So how does their system work? That's the important part of this article. The 349 MPs in Sweden's Riksdag are elected through proportional representation, 310 of them by the country's 29 constituencies, each of which has a set number of seats depending on their population. The remaining 39 are divided up so each party's parliamentary representation more or less matches its share of the national vote. 4% of the national vote, or 12% of a constituency vote, is needed to enter parliament. And so what ended up happening in that election? So we see here the Social Democratic Party got the most votes, 28%. They got 101 seats. Then you see down here, the Green Party, they got 4.3% of the vote. That's not that much, but they still got 15 seats in Congress. If this had been 2016 in America, where the Libertarian Party, they got like 3%, 4% nationally, they would have almost qualified in Sweden to actually get double-digit numbers of seats in their legislature. You would actually see more than 2 political parties in America in the legislature. And so if you see here, this is how it ended up breaking down into coalitions. You have the Swedish Democrats, who are the far right. You have the Left Party, which is the far left. You have the Social Democrats, who had gotten the plurality. So if this had been first past the post, the Social Democrats would have won. But that's not how it works in a proportional parliamentary system. You have to form coalitions. So these different political factions who don't necessarily agree with each other enough to be in the same political party now reaches the time where they have to work together and form a coalition. And what ended up happening was the Social Democrats, in coalition with the Green Party, the people who got 4.3% of the vote, and the Center Party, and sometimes even the Left Party, they agreed to form a government. And so the Greens, if they wanted to, if they were unhappy about something that the Social Democrats are doing, they could pull out of the coalition, and either the Social Democrats need to form a coalition with another party, or a snap election happens, and votes happen even if it's not a presidential election year or a parliamentary election year. And you actually almost saw this happen earlier this year in Sweden. The Left Party was upset about something the Social Democrats were doing regarding housing. And so the Left Party, who agreed to help the coalition stay alive, they had said that if the Social Democrats didn't fold on this demand, the Left Party was going to pull out of the coalition and a new election would have to be held. And what happened? The Social Democrats caved to the pressure because they didn't want to have to form a new coalition. They didn't want to have a snap election that would risk giving the Swedish Democrats more votes. So that just shows the difference. If we had a proportional representation system in America that required this kind of coalition building, you would see a small minor party like the Libertarians or the Greens actually have leverage over the 2 major parties. They could make or break coalitions. They could be the people Joe Manchin right now. You see how Joe Manchin is out there as a one-man wrecking ball in the Senate, preventing Democrats from doing more progressive things. Well, if we had a proportional representation system, we could have the Greens doing that. We could have the Libertarians doing that. We could have more representation in Congress that's honest, that's genuine. And some people will counter this by saying, oh, well, America already does kind of have that kind of coalition building. It's called primaries. That is not a good argument, because even after primaries, you see everybody have to pledge their loyalty to the candidate who won, the candidate who they might fundamentally disagree with. Whereas if you had a multi-party proportional representation system, well, we could be honest that we don't agree with them. You don't have to pretend to like Joe Biden. You don't have to pretend to like Hillary Clinton. If your party ends up with 5 seats and you need to decide between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, okay, well, then now you make that decision between Democrats and Republicans. But you get to still vote your conscience. You still get to speak your mind. You don't have to worry about party unity, which is the big thing that they use to prevent the progressives from primarying the centrist, neoliberal corporate Democrats. And so we see here, just kind of explaining what I already said, Sweden gets new government after weeks of coalition wrangling. So that's what happens. They actually have the vote, and then it takes them weeks to decide how are they going to form the new coalition. So 18 weeks after a general election, Social Democrat leader Stefan Löfven finally won enough support in the Swedish parliament Friday to secure a second term as prime minister. His victory ends a rare bout of political turmoil in the Nordic state after a surge in support for the far-right Sweden Democrats at the ballot box in September robbed both the country's traditional center-right and center-left blocs of a majority and forced a remaking of political alliances. Löfven won the backing of 115 MPs, 77 abstained, and 153 voted against him. Under Swedish rules, to be elected, prospective prime minister can be elected so long as there is not a majority against his or her candidacy. And so let's see here. What did the coalition end up being? The result of 4 months of wrangling is a new political landscape. Gone are the 2 former blocs, which faced off at successive recent elections. In their place is a new, larger, 4-party centrist unit with a minority coalition government of the Social Democrats and Greens, supported in parliament by the Center Party and Liberals. The Left Party have also agreed to supply limited support. And so you see, the coalition they have now is the Social Democrats and the 4.3% Greens. So if you were a political minority in America and we had a proportional representation system, you would actually be important. Your political voice would actually make a difference on the political process. Here we have Germany as another example of a parliamentary system. They just had their election this week. How did the vote break down? 25.7% for the Social Democrats, 24.1% for the Christian Democrats, who are Angela Merkel's former party. She was, 4-time prime minister of Germany. We've got the Green Party, who actually earlier this year were in first place in the polls, and then they kind of fell off a little bit. But they ended up getting 14.8% of the vote. But then we have down here the 8.7 others. And it looks like they even got 1 seat. The 4.9% Left Party, they actually ended up getting 39 seats, even though they only got 4.9% of the vote because of how it broke down regionally. And so now, what are the type of coalitions that could be formed to form a government? You could have the traffic light coalition, the SPD, FDP, and the Greens. This red, green, red one, which involves the Left Party that only got 4.9% of the support. You don't always need a majority. Sometimes you can have a minority government. But the whole point is to say is that this proportional representation voting system, which is the most common democratic process of voting in the West, it is far more democratic than the first past the post, and especially more democratic than America's 2-party capitalist system. And so how do we change this in America? How do we go from being a 2-party capitalist duopoly to being a multi-party proportional election system? How can we make that happen? Well, we have right here the Fair Representation Act. So let's read what Fair Vote says. Our country is ready to reform our elections. Now is the time for Congress to act. The Fair Representation Act, H.R. 3863, is the bold, comprehensive solution that solves our problems with partisan gerrymandering and uncompetitive elections and encourages politicians to represent everyone, not just their base. Partisan gerrymandering has only gotten worse in an era of sophisticated technology and polarized voting patterns. Redistricting has become a fraught endeavor, replete with corruption, controversy, and years of expensive litigation. Because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2019 that partisan gerrymandering was a political issue beyond the ability of federal courts to decide, an act of Congress is the only way to end gerrymandering in all states. However, our problems go beyond gerrymandering. Single winner districts no longer work well for American democracy. They lock most voters into congressional districts that are increasingly skewed toward one party and leaves too many voters unrepresented and powerless to affect outcomes. Millions of Americans, whether urban Republicans, red state Democrats, independents, women, and communities of color, are dramatically underrepresented with little chance of fixing this at the polls. The Fair Representation Act helps fix this. Voters would elect representatives with proportional ranked choice voting in larger multi-winner districts. Safe red and blue districts would be a thing of the past, as every district would elect both Democrats and Republicans in proportion to their level of support. With proportional results, there would be no gerrymandering. Every election would be competitive, and our votes would be far more powerful than they are today. Senators would also be elected with ranked choice voting. With more choices in the general election and proportional outcomes, the Fair Representation Act will create more opportunities for women, people of color, urban Republicans, rural Democrats, and independents. We must open elections to reflect our full diversity. The Fair Representation Act is the strongest commitment and most complete solution to voter equality, equal representation, and greater choice. It's how we make our democracy work again for everyone. I don't think our country's ever been a democracy, for one, just going to add that caveat to what they said there. We didn't even have presidential primaries until there were riots in Chicago in the 60s because the candidate that won the popular vote didn't end up being the nominee. And so we've never had a democracy. We've always had a corporate oligarchy in America. But at least with something like this, we'd be a little bit closer to real democracy. It would at least be a more democratic system so that we can start to express what we think it will take to become a real democracy, which in my opinion is not just political democracy, it's economic democracy also. And so what is that bill? H.R. 3863, Fair Representation Act. What does it say here? Official title is introduced. To establish the use of ranked choice voting in elections for senators and representatives in Congress. To require each state with more than one representative to establish multi-member congressional districts. To require states to conduct congressional redistricting through independent commissions and for other purposes. And it's co-sponsored by 7 people, including my representative, Jamie Rashkin here. And so I think the moral of all of this here is to say that America is not a democracy. America is a capitalist duopoly captured by partisan interests who are bought off through dark money, through super PACs, through mass donations given by the corporate elites who can afford to buy the 2 political parties, who then squeeze out any competition against their capitalist 2-party rule. And so I think the way that we break out of the 2-party system is by ranked choice voting to eliminate the spoiler effect entirely. You never have to fear voting for the lesser of 2 evils anymore. And once that boundary is out of the way, you no longer have to worry about the spoiler effect or the lesser of 2 evils. Now that frees people up to think about third parties. Now that frees them up to actually feel open to voting for them. And so then, once you have proportional representation in place also, and so now you're free to not vote for the lesser of 2 evils, and you know that if your party only gets 10% of support, you still might actually get congressional representation. And then, once we get to the point where we have ranked choice voting, proportional representation, and we're allowing third parties on the ballot who can win the Electoral College, they're on enough ballots to win the Electoral College, if they're able to actually debate on all three presidential debates and on state debates and on local debates, now all of a sudden, America's two-party capitalist system completely collapses. And even if the left only has 10% support, even if the left only has 5% support, they would have leverage and they would not have to water down their opinions. They wouldn't have to self-censor, or if that's what you think they're doing or not, whether we know they're self-censoring or that's their honest opinion, it's hard to tell, because the left in America often feels the need to be neoliberal, feels the need to ally with neoliberals. And that ends up watering down what socialists, what communists, what anarchists, what the real international left really thinks. But if we have open debates, proportional representation, and ranked choice voting, that would be a thing of the past. The capitalist duopoly would collapse. And so that's all I have to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please like, please subscribe. I'm actually going to put banner on the bottom. Please help support my work. I am a broke master's degree student in Sweden. It's been a month and a half into the semester. I still haven't gotten my student loans yet. I won't be getting them until November at this point because I'm still waiting for a lot of immigration documents to come in. And so please, please, please give to my Cash App. It's $ProPeace97, just like the name here. And even though I do really need the support right now, I don't want it all for myself. I want this project, this independent media project, to give back to the community. And so 50% of all of the money that you give me, I will be giving out to mutual aid organizations, to people actually boots on the ground, giving people food, giving people clothing, giving people aid, whether it be in the US or whether it be anywhere around the world. And so at the end of the month, I'm not going to do September because we're almost at the end now, but at the end of October, I will let you know how much money I got in my Cash App and then where that money will be going to. So please, please, please support my work. Thank you so much for watching, and till next time.